All right, we finished off in the middle of a chapter here, so let me go ahead and begin reading page 258. Liz and Mother shook hands and looked each other over. Liz was almost as tall as Mother and looked her straight in the eye. Mother smiled and clasped Liz's hands in both, in both of hers and said with a real warmth in her voice, "It's a pleasure to meet you." "You've got quite the daughter," Liz said. Mother laughed. "I don't know." Then Curtis stood up and walked toward us, and Liz said, "This is my friend Curtis," and she blushed. Curtis glanced at me, and we both said, "We've met." We all laughed, and then he shook Mother's hand. I remember how Judy had come back, even if I lost her for a bit, and Liz seemed so happy. How could I be sad? I turned to look out the front window so no one could see the jumble of emotions on my face. That's when I saw the old gray Chrysler Windsor drive by. I blinked and the car was gone. Had I imagined it? Mother was sitting on the couch and Betty Jean had brought in sweet tea and oatmeal muffins. Liz was talking and Mother and Curtis and Betty Jean were laughing at something she'd said. Everything seemed so normal. Just when I was sure I had imagined it, the car drove by again, very slowly, then turned the corner. I had to say something. I had to do something, but it was a common car, and it would be awfully embarrassing if I was wrong. On the other hand, what if Red had followed us here? Hurting Betty Jean would be the perfect way to get back at me. Maybe he knew Liz was here too. If it really was Red. The car drove past the house for the third time, and I could see a dent in the trunk. I jumped off the couch, causing Mother to spill tea all over her dress. "Marley! Get out!" I yelled, pulling her off the couch. "Now!" "What is it?" asked Betty Jean. "Go!" I said. I guess they heard something in my voice because Liz grabbed Curtis's arm and Betty Jean pushed them both into the kitchen, where Pastor George was talking on the phone. "Outside!" I said. I thought he was going to argue, but he took one look at my face and hung up the phone. A few seconds later, we were all huddled on the back stoop. We waited, frozen, for a long moment. Nothing happened. "Marley," said Pastor George finally, and he only sounded the tiniest bit irritated. "Could you please tell me what's going on?" "I saw Red's car drive by." Mother got a little paler, but she didn't move. Liz clutched Curtis's hand. "I see," said Pastor George. "Red is the boy with the dynamite, yes?" I nodded. "He has a great Chrysler Windsor." "I'll go look," he said. As soon as he was gone, the whole thing seemed ridiculous. Red wasn't really going to bomb anyone. Boys love to talk. Daddy always said, "Nothing's going to happen, certainly not to my friends." Lots of people owned dark gray Chrysler Windsors. There was probably a neighbor wanting to pick something up and was driving around the block while he waited. I panicked like a fool. Had I seen a dark gray Chrysler Windsor? A lot of cars look similar. Pastor George came back. "I don't see anyone there." "Marley's been a bit on edge lately," said Mother finally. My face turned red, and I willed myself not to cry. "Well," said Liz, letting go of Curtis's hand and winding her arm through mine. "Better safe than sorry." Betty Jean opened the back door and held it open, gesturing for her husband to go inside. But then we suddenly heard a car pull up in front of the house. We all froze. There was a crash and the sound of breaking glass, a screech of wheels driving off, and then an explosion. Oh no. Chapter 52. Afterwards, I'd been right. Something had happened after all. Something bad. Never knew I could be so upset about being right. Mother reached for my hand. Her fingers were trembling. Everyone was silent. After a minute or two, the smell of smoke wafted out of the open door. Betty Jean glanced over at Pastor George. "Stay here," he ordered, and he went back to the house again. He ordered, and he went back into the house again. Curtis moved to follow him, but Betty Jean grabbed his arm. "You heard your father." The next door neighbor poked her head out of a window. "You all right?" "I think so. Betty Jean choked up and couldn't finish. Liz shook her head. "Marley, if you hadn't said something." I glanced over at Liz. She was biting her lip, but I could still see it quivering. Curtis put his arm around her. Pastor George came back then. Someone threw a brick through our front window. It landed on the couch. From the damage of the living room, there must have been a couple of sticks of dynamite, too. And like a picture in slow motion, I could imagine it. Red leaning out of the window of his car, pitching a rock at us, like he'd done with the eggs. The window shattering like the ice on a pond in spring and covering us all with little bits of glass. All of us standing frozen, shocked, glittering as the sun shone in the ruined window, not noticing the dynamite until it was too late. We should call the police, said Mother. Betty Jean nodded, but she didn't move. I realized she was crying. Great big tears that flowed down her cheeks without making a sound. Pastor George sat down on a stump in the backyard and covered his face with his hands. I imagine, as a pastor, he had experience giving bad news to people, but it must have been different when it was your own wife and son. I knew I should be scared too. We could have been killed. But all I could think was the dynamite is gone. Red doesn't have any more, and no one was hurt. The next door neighbor came out then. She was old and tiny, shorter than me, with white hair and a lined face. I had already notified the authorities, she said. You just tell me what else you need me to call. Liz's family arrived first. Her mother wore a yellow dress, which looked beautiful against her dark skin, though half of the dress was wrinkled and the other half was not, as if she had been ironing when she got the call. Her father was light-skinned and a movie star handsome, like Montgomery Clift and Harry Belafonte, rolled into one. I thought Liz might introduce me, but her father put his arm around her shoulders, and her mother led her away. And only Tommy looked back at me and glared. Daddy ran up and threw his arms around Mother and me. It was Red, I said. He nodded and Mother started to cry. The old neighbor offered me a cup of coffee and I took it. My hands were cold, even though it was a warm evening, and I felt good to hold the cup. I tried to take a sip, but only managed to spill half the coffee on the ground. A few minutes later, the police arrived. There were two of them, an older man who went off with Pastor George to look at the damage in the house, and a young man with a mustache, who seemed most interested in talking to Mother and me. I told the policeman everything about Liz, about me running into each other at the zoo, and about taking Red's keys, looking into his trunk, and oh, Marley, Mother exclaimed. It gets worse, I admitted. I told him about getting stuck in the trunk. My daddy sucked in his breath as I told him about the letter opener forgetting the last two sticks, and David coming to pick me up. And even though I knew I was going to get in trouble, I deserved to get in trouble. It still felt good to tell. Finally, I took a deep breath. Since I spent so much time in that car, I knew when I saw it. And you know the rest. Silence again. The policeman gave me an odd look. Say something, I pleaded. I know I'm in trouble, but Mother began to laugh then. A nervous, hysterical laugh. The police officer glared at my mother. You don't actually believe this nonsense, do you? What? Said Daddy. It's ridiculous. Stealing keys, climbing into a trunk. Who can believe a story like that? It's true, I said. You can ask Liz. If you're lying, I'm sure the colored girl will too. My daughter does not lie, said Daddy. You're saying it was Red Dalton, the football star, right? The police officer asked. I nodded. Oh my goodness, this is so annoying. Sorry. The policeman shook his head. No way he'd pull a stupid stunt like this. But what I'd like to know, he said, is why are you at this colored family's house? What does it have to do with? Daddy started. Mother a hand on his arm. We're just dropping off some flyers. There's an election tomorrow. What it was it some sort of integrationist meeting? Mother shook her head. And what if it was? Snapped Daddy. Aren't you supposed to protect all of us? All citizens of Little Rock, he agreed. But if it was some commie meeting, my wife and 13-year-old daughter are not communists, said Daddy. Where's Sergeant Pike? Out of town, said the older officer coming out of the house. You were lucky. If anyone had been sitting by the window, no one wanted to finish the sentence. Numbers flowed through my head, prime numbers, times tables, pi, as many digits as I knew. But didn't how? The police didn't believe me. They weren't going to do anything. They were acting like Betty Jean should be grateful only to have a broken window and burnt up couch. The election. It was late when we finally got home, way past dinner time. But none of us were hungry. Mother and Daddy said goodnight and headed off to their bedroom. Aren't you gonna punish me? I asked. Daddy crossed his arms. Doesn't seem to do much good. I'm sorry. Mother held up her hand. No, Marley. I'm too tired for this. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Tomorrow's the election. Then Tuesday, said Mother, and they closed their door. I slept badly that night, dreaming of bricks crashing through our front window, dynamite exploding, and Mother and Betty Jean and Liz walking through our house with makeup on their faces and diamond tiaras. I wondered when my dream had turned into Cinderella ball, but then I realized it was broken glass in their hair. It wasn't rouge on their cheeks, it was blood. I called Liz first thing the next morning. Who is this? Liz's mother asked. Marley Nisbet, I admitted. Marley, she said softly, all I ever wanted was for Elizabeth to have the best education possible. But associating with you nearly got my daughter killed. She won't be talking to you again. But I. Miss Fullerton hung up the phone. It was hard to concentrate in school. JT wasn't there, and despite myself, I was kind of worried about him. Mr. Harding seemed distracted too. He was teaching the class percentages, but he kept getting the problems wrong. Three fourths was 75%, not 34%. I corrected him the first time, but he looked so embarrassed. I didn't dare correct him again. Besides, no one else in the class was paying attention. I kept waiting for someone to mention what had happened at Betty Jean's, but no one did. So, Sally had a new haircut and dress and talked nonstop about how she was going to get her picture in the paper at the cross victory party. Because of, because of course, she was sure her side would win. When I arrived home, there was a postcard from Judy in the mail. Good luck. Win the election and bring me home. Love, Judy. P.S. I need new laces for my saddle shoes. Black, please, extra long. Shoelaces. Such a normal concern. You voted? Betty Jean asked as I walked into the kitchen. Betty Jean? I said, I'm only 13. I'm asking everyone, she said without looking at me. She sniffed the air, then turned up to the oven. As soon as she opened it, a puff of smoke drifted out. Oh, Lord, she sighed. This is the second batch I've burned this afternoon. Betty Jean? I asked. What? I wasn't sure what to say first. Betty Jean had kept my secret about going to the gem, and I repaid her by almost getting her killed. Are we going to talk about what happened yesterday? No. Betty Jean was scraping what appeared to be burnt cookies into garbage. I'm sorry, I said. I know you told me to stay away from Liz, but Marley, interrupted Betty Jean. What? I need this job. We're still paying back the money from when Curtis was arrested. Now we need a new living room too. You know the best way to lose your job? I didn't answer. Yelling at the daughter of your employee. I don't want to do that. So I'd appreciate if you kindly be quiet and leave me alone. But that wouldn't help anyone. Not me, not Liz, certainly not Betty Jean. I tried to imagine what Liz would do. You know, she said finally, I think my parents would appreciate it if you yell at me. They haven't gotten around to it themselves, and I know I deserve it, so it saved them the trouble. Betty Jean snorted and kept her eyes on her cookies, but I could tell she was trying hard not to smile. You're a strange girl, Marley. I'm so sorry, Betty Jean. I know, she said. I know. Mother, Daddy, and I listened to the results come in on KLRA radio station throughout dinner and afterwards. I did my homework. Daddy graded papers, Mother did the dishes, and none of us said a word. The stop candidates were ahead all evening, but when KLRA went off the air at 12:30 a.m., it was still too close to call. I was sure I wouldn't be able to sleep, but I put my head on my pillow just to rest. And the next thing I knew, I heard the front door open as Daddy went out to get the paper. I washed my face and got dressed, anxious to know what had happened, at the same time dreading it. As soon as I walked into the kitchen, Daddy held up the paper. Stop wins recall victory. Perjurers thrown off board. Mother grinned at me. Daddy said, we did it! I burst into tears. Marley, we won, said Mother, but I couldn't stop crying. I thought about I thought winning the election would solve everything, but now that the big day was here, I realized it wasn't the answer. It wasn't the end after all. It wasn't even close. New board members needed to be appointed by the Pulaski County Board of Education. There were legal challenges to integration in the courts. Even if high schools did open, Liz and I still wouldn't be in the same school. What is it? Asked Daddy. Tears of joy, I lied, and my parents seemed to believe me. I called Liz again before I went to school, but this time no one answered. All morning I couldn't wait for lunchtime to come so Mr. Harding and I could do some math and forget about everything except algebra. But when I pulled out my book and tried to do the first problem, I couldn't copy it down correctly because my eyes kept filling with tears. What's wrong, Marley? Mr. Harding asked gently. Have you ever looked forward to something for a long time, and then when you finally got what you wanted, it wasn't what you expected? Mr. Harding nodded. I'm happy we won, I said. So how come I don't feel better? He looked thoughtful and said nothing for a long moment, then pulled out a pencil and started to write on a blank piece of paper I had before me. I think what's happened, Marley, is that you realize the world isn't an addition problem. He wrote 3 plus 4 equals 7 down on the paper. We tell kids that sometimes. We pretend the world is straightforward and simple, easy. You do this, you get that. You're a good person and try your best, and nothing bad will happen. But the truth is, the world is much more like an algebraic equation, with variables and changes, complicated and messy. Sometimes there's more than one answer, and sometimes there is none. Sometimes we don't even know how to solve the problem. He wrote x squared plus 4x minus 21 equals 0. But usually, if we take things step by step, we can figure things out. You just have to remember to factor the equation, break it down into smaller parts. I started at that equation, pictured it factored into x minus 3, x plus 7 equals 0. Imagined the solutions x equals 3 and x equals negative 7 and felt a little better. You're right, Marley. Winning selection isn't the solution, but it's a start. Mr. Harding, I said. Yes. At the beginning of the year, I was helping JT cheat on his homework. I know. I looked at him, surprised. I grade your homework every day. I recognize your handwriting. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. Mr. Harding shrugged. I thought it would be better if you told me yourself. I nodded. Are you going to punish me? Yes, he said. I'm going to make you do extra math during your lunchtime. I smiled. Now come on, he pushed the algebra book toward me. Let's start solving the world's problems, one step at a time. I was in the kitchen doing my homework when Liz called me. That afternoon, when Liz called me that afternoon. I can only talk for a second, she said. This is where we will stop for the day.